Hello, humans. Okay, so today is the 19th of September, the year 2021. We're in the age of Aquarius now, and we're 2,000 years. We're 2,780 years past the age of turning to the age of Pisces. So the astrology is muddied. So in the sense that there's no clear delineation as to when one age shifts to another. You can use astrological signs in the sense of alignments as convenience, but it's a question of, well, this one occurred at this particular point, or is it the next one that occurs 3 years from now, right? Because these ages are so long, 2,780 years in length, and it takes 72 years to make 1 degree in this change in one of these astrological ages. So it's got a very large degree of variance, and you can still be accurate. So it's convenient to think of them in particular ways, especially when we're trying to align history, because so much of history is wonky based on people screwing with the numbers over time for different purposes, placing things in one year or another as they chose, because there was not necessarily any consequences for doing it, and also not necessarily having any great alignment for years from one person to the next throughout ancient times. Now, the woo abides, all right? The woo is always there. There's shit that's always hidden. There's always stuff going on. And the woo is deep and the woo is long, and the woo includes everything that we also hide from ourselves, deny ourselves, and everything that is hidden and denied from us. So it's not like simply behind the scenes. It's not simply obscured. It throws in there those things that are obscured in the midst of history. But the interesting part about the woo is that we can think of the woo as like very much like the ether, or very much like an ocean. And that is that stuff that's thrown out there, universe will haul back up at the most opportune times for us. It may not appear that way, but it is shocking as to how often, and in fact, the woo people know that all of universe is synchronicity, and us discovering synchronicity. Because universe, the one word, is passed through our experience. So now we're going to talk about somebody else's experience. So there was this guy, and he was a white dude, we know this, and he was a Saxon, okay? And he spoke the Saxon language, and he was a member of the folk. And he wrote a letter in the 1200s. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get the exact date here. I don't know if I've got it right offhand. 1255. Okay, so Haida, he writes in 1255 this letter of instruction to his son. His name is Haida. Haida Linda. Oh, excuse me. Haida Linda writes a letter of instruction to his son, and he says, "Kid, here's the deal. There was a big flood. I was able to save your mom and you and this book. And this letter of instruction to you is to tell you what to do with this most valuable possession, this book. And this book was damaged in this great flood that I rescued your mom and you from. And this book has been replicated by me. I copied it. I've scribed it to a foreign paper and new paper. And you are to do this with it. These are instructions from me to you. This is one generation telling the next what to do with it. This book that he copied over on foreign paper in 1255 and gave to his son, then an infant, along with this letter of instruction, is a very powerful book, because this book goes all the way back to 2200 BCE. This book is the history of the Saxon folk from 2200 BC, from the age of Aries through the age of Pisces to this age here that we're in now. We have Haida's words in his letter of instruction and the book that his people carried through time. And it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating reading. Simply because right off the bat you're struck by the curious synchronicity to today's events. It's an interesting book. It's the Codex Oralinda. It's difficult to get. You don't want to buy it and read it. Most people are not going to try and read it. It's very expensive. It's only really of use to people that are very interested in language and ancient history. If you have that bent, it's worth the money, and it's worth the trouble of dealing with the foundation to get it. But it's not a novel. It's not an easy read. It's a transliteration. Okay, so it's written in Old English, Old Saxon. Now, we call our language English, but that's a misnomer. We really should call it Saxon. Saxons were the people, the white people that were in the area of Germany, and they ranged over into Poland. You can think of them as what the Germans identified as the Aryan race in most of Central Europe, but it includes the Anglophiles, the English, and the Saxons in Scotland, and the Picts and the Celts and that, right? The Picts and the Celts were offshoot tribes of the Saxons, and they had different languages, and they were actually, the Picts and the Celts were, they have a separate deviation from the Saxon main body, but nonetheless the language translates all the way across from Central Europe into Ireland. And in the period of time that we're talking about here, all right, so it's of interest to me because I like languages, and I like tracking languages and tying them to people and to phenomena and stuff. It's an interesting book to me because it's in original Old English. It has in here the original book, and it's a transliteration. That is to say, they took it out of the original texts. This is in the back part of the book. And they took it out of the original text, and they swapped over the alphabet where appropriate and made it into current modern English and translated those words where they had to. So it's a complex operation. It's a preservation of history and converting it into current modern English so that we understand what happened to these Saxon people over this period of over 4,000 years through these two ages, to these great ages of history, right? The age of Aries, the ram, the coming of law, the establishment of religion, the establishment of the idea of a state, of a nation, of a city-state, into schooling and the current rise of the civilization. Over these 4,000 years, here is a history of what happened to the Saxon people. And it's fascinating because it goes on into all of the different kinds of things that are happening now. The plagues, we have an example of the flood here, the earth changes that forced Mr. Linda to grab his family, throw him in a boat and flee, right? That kind of thing. But we have the plagues, we have the earth changes, we have the social encounters as the Saxons rubbed shoulders, so to speak, with all these other people, and it talks about all the other people. And this is not a novel, this is not a journal or anything like that. This is the extract. These are the those things that were worth writing down and preserving from one generation to another. And so we can say that these are a scientific exploration of what it meant to be Saxons over time, over these 4,000 years, extracted as the natural law of Saxons, all right? So this is the same kind of book and needs to be read the same way as what Genghis Khan wrote down in his treatise for how the Mongols should live. Because what he did then was to have all of these people, his scholars, go out and research in their fashion and think about and come back to him with these precepts as to how the Mongols should live, right? And so that was the Mongols' version of natural law extracted from the Mongol people in their environment and written down in an attempt to pass it on to their next generation. Just as we in the Western world and throughout all of the world extract natural law from the earth around us, you know, gravity, waterfalls, coconuts fall, that kind of thing, right? We extract this idea, we write these laws down, we refine them, we make them into laws. We say that there is the law of gravity, right? That it'll always work. If you step off that cliff, you're going to fall on those rocks and die. And you know, we don't have to repeat this because it's a law. We know it will happen. Okay, so that is a natural law that's extracted from a universe, from our reality. There's also natural laws that are extracted from people as the expression of that law. So if you can say that, you know, if you can extract an expression of a people's character, and if it's repetitious with each and every one of those individuals to some consistent degree, and consistent over time, then you can say that this is a natural law that can be derived from this particular kind of a people, right? And you could say that, all right, so no pygmy is ever going to be 6'9". Okay, so that's a natural law that you can extract. It's a stupid one, but it's an example of one. That the class of individuals that we call tribal people, that we call pygmies, are shorter than 6'9". It's a stupid law, but you see what I'm saying, right? It's also would be like you could extract the natural law that all Saxons are going to be white to some degree, right? All people with Saxon heritage will have some degree of whiteness in them. So it's a stupid law, but you see what I'm saying. But there's also, so that would be a natural form of an expression of the genetics, but there's also the expression of the character that can be extracted as natural law. So this is where it gets interesting for our current times, all right? Because we're talking actually about the same kind of battle that's going on right now. Now, I'm of the opinion that the bad guys on the planet that are controlled by what I call the bug are trying to kill off white people because we don't make good slaves, and they think they can enslave a lot of the other non-white people, and that they can make the other non-white people better slaves if they don't have white people around causing everybody a bunch of problems. And so interestingly, our little book here begins with a story of this woman by the name of Adele, who is in a real hard spot. She's a young woman, she's in love with this guy, she's been chosen by circumstance and the Saxon folk, the council of the folk, to become a folk woman. A folk woman is a repository of knowledge. And so it's a deviation. You can't be married and have children and do all of that kind of stuff and involve yourself in the politics. This is where you start getting at some interesting ideas right out of this thing here, that those people that are involved in guiding and ruling the folk, not ruling, but guiding, because the rules, the laws rule, not individuals. So it's an interesting idea. It is truly a description of the folk here, the Saxon people, deriving the idea of a republic that far back. Anyway, so Adele, this woman, she's in love with this guy, she wants to go off and get married and so on, but she's been chosen. She feels the call as well, but it's muddied in her, all right, because of this attraction to this guy and her hormones. So we get the impression she's in her mid-20s, and she's at a juncture. And universe provides a push in the sense of this evil bastard, right? The bad guy in our comic book here is called the Magus. And that's a very interesting word. Now I'm going to deviate in a second. But so Adele runs into a situation where she is slotted to become a folk woman, doesn't really want to necessarily. She's been educated into it for at least the last 8 years. And so she's done a long apprenticeship. But she's not alone. So she's at a point where she has to make a decision, and the Magus comes along and makes it for her by killing the folk woman that's in existence for the people of the Saxons at that point. In this long battle that's going on between the Magus and Magus's people and the Saxons. And so Adele is thrown into a real new world because all of a sudden there's war, there's things going on, and as an apprentice, and the closest they've got, the others were not necessarily as trained as far, she's got to be thrown into this role of the folk woman in this council of the Saxons, right, as they prepare and fight war against the Magus. And so this is our little story here. Now, it'd make a great movie, but scriptwriters are going to end up bald, if they're not already, trying to get through it to come up with an effective movie, and it wouldn't be nowhere near passable by any social acceptable standards today because it's so anti-woke. All right? They talk here, they describe everybody in these exacting language. So they talk about the Finns, the Celts, the people from Crete, the people from all different other kinds of places on the planet in their interaction with the Saxons over these 4,000 years. So it's not necessarily a pleasant tale. They go into and it's not a tale at all. You can't really read it. It's a book for linguists. It's a transliteration. So you have one line in the Old English and then one line in the English, the current English that's translated, and then commentary on how that translation occurs, right, throughout the book and so on, and the extracts from the volume. And so it's a very interesting book in that regard from a linguist's viewpoint because I like the interaction with a different understanding of language, and I've been following in the evolution of language, deviation of it from Teutonic and so on. Now, it's an interesting aspect of this is that English is more Teutonic than German, which is where we get the word Teuton. But English is truly more Teutonic than German because German has deviated so much. But if you go into Loom of Language and you study that book with seriousness and study it, so I'm still working on the thing and I've been working on it for a couple of years now, you will get to the point where you'll be able to pick up and decide. You can decide, okay, so today I can look at Swedish, I can look at German, I can look at Belgian, I can look at Flemish, even Old Flemish, I can look at Dutch, and that group of languages, and just read them, right? And so I can read a little Swedish and so on. You can just get your mind to think in the way in which English is naturally just shaded over from each of those languages. You can do the same thing with English with the Romance languages because so many of our nouns our descriptors are extracted from Latin, but it doesn't quite work as well with the other two as it does with the Teutonic languages because all of the activity, all of the verbs, the participles, the prepositions, and so on, and all the absolutes and the infinitives and so forth are within the Teutonic base. But that also gets you curiously back into some parts of Sanskrit. So as a linguistic tool, this is very interesting because it goes back to Old English, and you can really see the roots in the Old English to the now current other Teutonic languages. So fascinating. Plus, it's also, if you know how to read it, it is a fascinating understanding of history. Now, here's the problem. It's a history of a specific people that were paranoids, okay, because they'd been beset back in 4,000 years ago. They were beset by this guy and nearly wiped out. And then this is their story of survival, and it is brought to us by this individual. He was the person that provided this book through his son and lineage to the saving of the volume. But this is a brief, intermittent little hits and misses throughout this period of time. It is not in any way comprehensive. It's not anything easy to read. I'm not encouraging anybody to get this book. It's very expensive. It's only of use to people like myself, right? And a few other strange people. Well, I shouldn't characterize them as strange. Anyway, in any event, so I found it interesting on a number of different levels. So now in the history part of it, Adele, way back when, she's facing problems with the Magus. Now bear in mind, this, all right, so the Magus, all right, so let me back up. within this book, there is the ability to extract, because that's what they were really writing down, was the laws to pass on from generation to generation that they extracted from the people, how to live effectively. So this book is a science book. So it's very much a science book as, in fact, more of a science book, more of a true science book than Linus Pauling's The Chemical Bond. Because Linus Pauling was under the influence of screwy ideas, and all of that big book was based on quantum mechanics that really isn't applicable or factual. This book is factually extracted from universe laws and stuff on how people should live and how we had lived all this time, and it was effective, is what they're saying. And so you find in there some things that are really interesting. So back in this period of time, back this far, the Saxons had a law. And one of their laws that they had extracted from before the age of law, and this is curious that this begins in the shortly after the age of Aries had started. One of the rules that they had, one of their laws said, never tolerate an unfree man in your presence. Okay? And then they go on to explain through these little parables and little short bits and stories and myths and later through the whole book, and then through the extraction of the actual formalized extraction of the law itself, why this is pertinent. Okay? And they give you examples like, at this time the Slavs people had been killed in a pandemic by the Magus and enslaved. And it did this shit to their mind, and you just can't be around these guys, okay? And so they give you these laws and how it pollutes your own society and what happens to your own society and the impact on your own society from violating these laws. And so in that sense, it's a religious text, right? But there's no religion per se, although they do discuss the nature of the gods of the Saxons at that time. But it's in passing. It's not like, God such and such said such and such. No, it's saying these people worshiped this guy, Wotan, which later becomes Odin. And so it's, they worship this guy, Wotan. And it's not a guy, it's not a person, it's not a personification, it's not a personality, it was their origination point, right? It's their origination story that they held sacred. And from the point of origin, and we get Odin, and the T is translated to the D, and the A is translated to the I, and so that's how you learn to read from Swedish to English and so on, right? And so the Old English here, Wotan, was attached to our current idea of Odin very, very, very loosely. All right, it's much more akin to the idea of the formless, nameless God that the Jain worship currently. The Jain are 25-30 million people in India that are a separate religious subset. And they have an interesting idea. So Odin or Wotan can be thought of as the the personification through sound of a principle, a guiding principle in life more than anything. So anyway, it's a fascinating read, okay? Because poor Adele, she's getting the shit kicked out of her people by this Magus guy. The Magus guy is doing things like polluting the streams, polluting the rivers with dead animals to induce pandemic. And all different kinds of stuff, polluting their environment in order to kill them off. And those that survived, like the Slavs that survived, were those people that survived lead poisoning. They polluted the rivers of the Slavs by dumping great heaps of lead up in the hills where those rivers had their origination. And then they just let the lead poisoning take care of that generation and wiped them out in like 3 years. They just came down later, 3 years later. You get a lot of lead in your, and that's your only source of water. You can't range for water. You're trapped with that water. You don't know the lead is in the water. And within 3 years, your brains are shot. And so they took over the whole territory by just polluting the water. So this shit was going on back then. Anyway, so this is an interesting read for people like myself. So I got to be careful because, you know, people listen to what I say, and I don't want people to rush out and cause Jan problems because they're going to be very disappointed with this book. You know, I mean, I don't know if you can, you know, it's a lot of weird kind of things, but I'm fascinated by it. Oh, geez. All right. So I get lost in the language instantly just on reading it, but it's not anything that I don't know. You can't really even see it here. You know, it's the Old English and then the translation and then the Old English and then the translation, and it's these little stories and parables and things. And what's fascinating for me is the derivation of all the language, and then the stories themselves, the content of them now seem to be very pertinent because we seem to be fighting this same force even now, and synchronistically, because of probably the concept of Wotan here as the expression of learning from universe has synchronistically brought this book up to my consciousness now in order that I can put it out on this video so that we can be discussing this fucker that we're fighting right now. Just as the Magus now has weaponized CRT against the Saxons. It's weaponized the air against the Saxons, and that's something else. The Adele's people over time faced the Magus in various different forms, where they would send disease their way by air. When they knew that the wind currents were going particular ways, they would burn stuff that would cause people to be ill. And so, you know, this is nothing new. We can't, you know, it's like, okay, people, get your head out of your ass. This has been going on for literally 4,000 fucking years. Now they're just convinced you to take it in a shot. So, anyway, so here we are with our current battle against the Magus. We're going through all of this shit again, only now we're in the age of knowledge, right? So our people got the shit kicked out of them here in this little transition period, rebuilt during there, and then came back out here. Now, this book is really interesting in terms of how it extracts and deals with these natural laws and the relationship of, and this is, a lot of this is inference, a lot of this is by nature of the fact that I know other things that are outside this book. So you have to have a certain understanding of how the peoples moved through Europe and through, you know, what we call Scandinavia and that sort of thing over time relative to what was going on. So here we have people back 4,000 years, and if you were to actually just read the language and extract it into modern English and write it down, and let any conspiracy theorist read this language, just read these descriptors without putting any bias on it, and not put this word there, they would say the organization that the thing being described was an organization, that it was located in northern Italy, and it was the Catholic Church. Just by the description of what was going on here. That's how this Magus came and attacked the Gauls who lived to the south, the French people that lived to the south of the Saxons, and what they did to them and so on. Only you read it, you think, no, wait a second, there's something goofy here. They're talking about how the Catholic Church actually spread through Europe, and it's like, no, wait a second, that's 2,000 years before the Catholic Church. And they keep describing this magus, this magician, that's doing all of this, and you look at the and you infer, because of the words that are being described by these very many generations. It's not all just Adele's story. Hers is just like a couple of pages up in this area, but you know, so it's all these words over time, and it's like, crap, it's the same fight. It's the same thing going on now. And didn't we have, and it's just, oh my God, one of the big sections in here is the confusion of the councils. Okay, the councils of the Saxons were infiltrated. There were people put in the councils that should not have been there. And they were put in the lower level of councils. And oh my God, if you actually look at it, we come up and we find out that, well, Jesus Christ, I mean, shit here, you know. We're only 4,000 years too late because these people had republics with representational democracy 4,000 years ago. They had councils that represented the collective tribes and on up. And then they had the folk councils, which were what we would think of as like national leaders. That's why Adele's problem was such a big deal, right? And then also the fact that the folk women were the ones that were the diviners and held knowledge for the, they were like the logistics people and the intelligence people for warfare, okay? Not intelligence in like planning, like, they did operational planning and so on, right? And they plotted it against time and all of this sort of deal. So anyway, so nothing new under the sun. We're fighting the same battles. They had republics back then. They didn't call them that, didn't conceptualize it that way, but it was exactly what we've got here. They had the same problem then with that we're facing now with the councils being infiltrated, causing confusion among the councils, the constitutional crises, and here it is, Adele dealing with all of this as one of these people that should have been a principal player, but the Magus came in and killed off the folk woman that would have been her mentor for those last 8 years. She had another 8 years to go on her apprenticeship, right? So a 16-year apprenticeship before she reached the point where they would actually allow her to do work, so to speak. And here she was catapulted into it at that point. Now, I make this a lot more exciting by compressing all of this stuff into this particular moment, but this is just simply a few bits of words. As I say, it would make a nice movie. You could write it as a nice movie. But it would never get past any kind of censorship today. It couldn't be made today because of the nature of the stuff being discussed as really adult. And you'd just offend too many of these children people. And they even describe these people here in this book. And they describe what happens to individuals that violate the natural laws. Now, the natural laws that are in here are actually extracted. I mean, one of the chapters is something to that effect. Hang on a second. Talks about the 3 cities, laws and regulations, general laws, laws for the army and war, folk, mother, and kings at war, security and war aftermath. That was a really interesting one. Preventing war, and the preventing war is, if you are at peace, you must be training every day for war, and you'll never have war. Laws for the steersmen, those are the people that steer the folk. Useful precedents about the laws, about all these myths, where they came from, the principles, justice, how to deal with treasure, how to deal with cities, conflicts and migration, the eastern walls, all different kinds of things. Fascinating. And as I say, you have the original manuscript reproduced, so you can go back and track it down and see if they've actually transliterated as you would have. And it provides just a really good overview of the Wu abiding, because it does. Here we have an example that the same Wu we're in now, the same situation where the obscuring of the vote, the fact that it's not transparent, the obscuring of this has led to the confusion of the councils and an illegal leadership that is now made allegiances with the Magus that wants to wipe us out through the shot so the Magus can take over everything, right? And we're dealing with the same thing 4,000 years on. And here is interesting. Universe has floated this book through the Wu for 4,000 years. It's a collection of books. There's a lot of little tiny books within it, right? Sort of like the little books in the Bible sort of thing. And it's that sort of a deal, right? And in a sense, you could think of it as the folk Bible, the folk laws and so on, because it doesn't go into the religion per se. It doesn't provide the idea of, retribution from a deity or anything for violating these laws. It provides the practical examples of what happens. And that's it. And it's an extract of these laws. So it's a folk Bible in that sense, extracted through all these little books with myths and other things thrown in there. And it's quite fascinating in the language, and just is remarkable in the synchronicity to the current time in these just few little bits that I've extracted from it, most of which is not associated with these bits. And that's it. So the Wu abides, and we keep abiding in it. We will get through this. We've been getting through this repeatedly. As I keep saying, the Magus, the bug, is patient, and it keeps resurfacing, and it keeps coming at us periodically, but it has only these same sets of tricks. And it's the same structure. The Magus is described in here in these brief few descriptions. It sounds exactly like a communistic society. And the actions are just what we're seeing today in terms of the way in which the folk is damaged by dealing with these other damaged individuals. And it's interesting that the folk have, the Saxon people had come to the conclusion that you should not ever tolerate slaves in your presence. That a slave is an offense to you as well as to the person that is enslaved. And that it is a slave is an offense to your social order as a Saxon person, because of the pollution that slavery does to the minds of everyone involved at all the levels, and because of the pollution that it does to the social order at all levels, from the money outward. If you tolerate slavery, one of the rules here is you never accept the coinage of someone that tolerates slavery. So you don't trade with the Magus, you don't accept the Magus's coins, you don't accept their trade because it's polluted by the slave, right? And these rules are really straightforward and simple. There's a number of them you get through, but it's just really interesting as to how Universe has bubbled this old book up and gotten Jan to repackage it into such a nice thing. I got 2 copies, of course. One to set away because I'm drinking chaga tea and shit happens and stuff. So one active and one to set away for when the active becomes too poor. Anyway, but as I say, the woo abides. We'll get through it. We've gotten through it in the past. We'll get through it again. We've been beset in the past. We've been beset recent past, and we've been beset in the ancient past. We rediscover it each and every time, and we come out of it each and every time. This time, we were a little bit smarter, I think, and caught the whole process a little earlier. So off to battle with the Magus, the bug, and that force that's out there. And anyway, looking forward to the Age of Knowing, because the woo is still going to abide, but we'll get to go out and sift it and get nets out there and get into real history. So now this is old woo, okay? This goes back 4,000 years. That's old woo. Now, I'm really, really interested to get into the ancient woo, 10, 20, 30,000 years old. That's coming. So the woo abides, abide for it.